Okay, hello everyone. I am joined here today by my friend Johanna, and many of you have heard me talk about her before. In fact, she has been a guest on my channel before when the two of us, were talking with two other friends about our top 5 favorite fantasies, which was a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun with that discussion. And Johanna is here today, though, to talk with me about her experience reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen. So I will let Johanna introduce herself and talk about her experiences. And we're going to kind of compare because we are both in the same place right now reading the Malazan Book of the Fallen. We are halfway through. I'm halfway through my reread, and she is halfway through reading the series for the first time. And one of the things we want to address, among others, this is kind of going to be a why you should read type of discussion. So this will be for people who have not read the series before. It could also be for people who have read the series. I think they would probably find it interesting as well. But this will be spoiler free. We're going to keep it spoiler free. So if you have not read the series, fear not, we will not spoil anything for you in the course of this discussion. And hopefully we will dispel some of your possible fears about the series, and perhaps give you some idea of what to expect when you begin it. So, Johanna, thank you so much for being here today. It is lovely, as always, to see you, and I really appreciate you coming here to talk to my viewers. So,
Oh, my pleasure, Philip. Thank you so much for having me again. It's such an honor to be invited back on your channel. I thought this would be the perfect opportunity for us to discuss the series because, as you said, we're both at the midpoint. You want to reread, and me as a first-time reader. And I think it would be great for people to know that you can enjoy Malazan. A lot of people talk about how much better it is on a reread, and I do not doubt that. I'm sure that there's much to be gained from rereading this series, but I'm also here to say that there is much to enjoy as a first-time reader. So I'm excited to
yes.
have this discussion.
Oh, that's fantastic. And I would agree with you. Absolutely. My first time reading it, when I read it 3 or 4 years ago, I was totally on my own. I didn't know anybody. I didn't know about BookTube even. And it was, I would say, fairly confusing for me, but I really enjoyed it. I was absolutely in awe in places, and it was a wonderful experience. And I knew as I was reading it that I was going to reread it. I had been planning to reread this series even before I started my BookTube channel. It was going to be really part of the channel. Really was going to be one of the first big things I wanted to feature was my reread of the Malazan Book of the Fallen. And I will say that it is a series that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. It really is a long-term, very rewarding experience. That's how I like to think of it. But I got a lot out of it on my first read. I'm getting even more on the second read, and I suspect this is a series that I could read again and again and again and get so much out of each and every time. But I'm really interested in hearing about what you've experienced on your first read. And I want to ask you one little question before we get started with that, which is, do you consider yourself now a MalazTuber?
I'm a wannabe MalazTuber because I love that community so much.
Yeah.
Shout out to Iskar Jarek and the wonderful community and Discord that he has. I am on that Discord, and I have interacted with many of those fellow MalazTubers. I've had to apologize to many of them that I can't watch several of their videos yet, as I have not finished the series.
Yeah.
But I feel their passion, and when they express their passion for it, their excitement for the series, it's something I can empathetically feel, and I've definitely had that experience so far.
Cool. So, I mean, in my book, you're a MalazTuber then.
Thank you.
I'm not the authority on that. I would defer to somebody like Iskar Jarek, but I would consider you one. In fact, I guess if you're reading the books and you made one video on the series, and if you consider yourself a MalazTuber, then you're a MalazTuber, I think, right?
All right, then I'll take it. If you say it's okay for me to call myself that, I think I'll accept.
Yes, I will defend your right to call yourself that. Absolutely. So I'm calling myself a MalazTuber too. So, and I do lots of other stuff. I know you do lots of other stuff on your channel, but you know, we're passionate about this series. So I'm honored by the title MalazTuber. So.
Yeah.
So, okay, well, let's talk about, maybe if you don't mind, would you like to talk about your experience so far? You're halfway through the series for the first time. So if you don't mind, just kind of give me a little rundown of your experiences.
Okay. Where should I begin? I guess with Gardens of the Moon, right?
Sure.
So yeah, I actually, before I begin, I would be curious, how did you first learn about Malazan Book of the Pond? Since
Oh,
this is
sure. Yeah.
pre-BookTube and everything, how did you first learn about it?
Yeah, so I was kind of a funny question. I've been reading fantasy since I was a kid, and I love it. And I actually even started a fantasy novels course at the college where I teach, and so it was just a way for me to create an environment where people could talk about fantasy, because I believe that fantasy, much of it is worthy of critical exploration. That's kind of the mission of my channel as well. So that my YouTube channel was an outgrowth really of the course that I started teaching. And it's just a way for me to be in dialogue with people about fantasy and all of that. So I was on this quest to find great fantasy. And I think I probably just Googled, best fantasy or something like that. And this is a series that comes up in a lot of those lists. And so I didn't know anything about it. I really didn't. I just thought, okay, I keep hearing about this. And I pronounced it Malazan back in those days, like a lot of other people. So nothing wrong with that. No judgment here. But I found it, and I bought it. And I think I just bought the first book just to try it out to see if I would like it. And I thought, oh, wow, this is, okay, I'm definitely buying the rest of these. And then I just read through the series. And like I said before, I knew that I would be rereading this series because I loved it, first of all. And secondly, I thought I've got a lot more to learn from this. I have a lot more. I think I can get a lot out of this on a second read. So, but yeah, that's how I did it. And I envy you, actually, being a part of the BookTube community. You're doing it a really nice way, I think, and having lots of people to talk to and all that. So, I mean, I'm glad I'm here now, but I wish I had on my first read of the series known some of the really generous, nice people in the BookTube communities, especially those MalazTubers you talked about before, how nice they are. And I've experienced that as well. So yeah, so that was my experience.
That's funny because I had a very similar experience in a way. I didn't know anything about the series at all. What happened was my husband a couple of years ago was also researching Google lists of like top fantasy series of all time, and that
Mhm.
Malazan Book of the Fallen kept coming up in his search. So one day we were in a used bookstore, and he searched and found a mass market paperback of Gardens of the Moon. I should have put it out here, but it's the one with prawn on the cover, the red
Oh
one.
yeah.
Yeah, so he picked it up, and I can't remember. It's funny because I think this has happened with us a couple of times where he's bought a fantasy book and then I end up being the one reading it, but somehow I ended up taking it from him. I think what happened was he decided to go. He decided to read the ebook copy of it because he knew enough, and so I knew enough that it wasn't considered an easy read.
Uh-huh.
But he wanted the ebook copy because you can on a ebook copy do like ebook copy do a Google search or some kind of X-ray search to like look up names or look up reference things. So he decided to go that route, and I took the mass market paperback copy, and I didn't have any expectations because at that time there was little to no Malazan content on YouTube. I
Right.
think there
Right.
was some, but in most of the booktube channels I was following at the time, I never heard people talk about it.
Huh.
So I picked it up and I was very pleasantly surprised.
Hmm.
I There was something about the way Erikson wrote that immediately drew me in, that I was immediately intrigued.
Huh.
And I found I was fascinated by the characters. I was fascinated by the dark tone, but then I loved the quirkiness and humor that was
Yeah.
in there as well. And I liked the storyline. I liked the setting. I liked the magic. There wasn't anything I didn't like. I was absolutely fascinated by it. And once I finished the book, I remember having that feeling of like, I could go back and reread this thing all over again. Like I actually felt like I could do that. And I don't often have that experience when reading books. I don't
Uh-huh.
often have the experience where I feel like I can immediately reread the book, but I did have that experience. So that was my initial experience with Malazan Book of the Fallen. And
Okay.
maybe both of us were served in a way, not knowing anything. I don't know. Maybe it was good because I know I talk to a lot of people nowadays who haven't started the series yet. And I'm hoping this video can help some of those people, but I know a lot of people have a great amount of anxiety starting this series because they
Yeah.
hear various things about the complexity and the investment of time and those kind of things.
Right. Yeah. Speaking of the complexity, so some of the things that people worry about when they think, should I read this series, would include just the vastness of the world, the large cast of characters, and speaking of the characters, the unconventional approach to storytelling in some ways. So Erikson and his friend Esselmont, who co-founded this world with him, they enjoy upending tropes. And one of the real main classic fantasy tropes is that you follow along with a hero who saves the world and that sort of thing. And we don't get a central protagonist necessarily here, do we? We don't get a group of characters that we follow along from beginning to end, and we watch their growth, and they make this big decision to save the world, and that does not happen here. So that's something I think that throws a lot of people, perhaps. But how about you? How are you experiencing this big cast of characters, this vast world, and the various cultures and races and all the other things that are being kind of thrown at you right in the beginning from Gardens of the Moon?
Yeah, so I didn't have a problem with it in Gardens of the Moon at all for whatever reason. I mean, I definitely had many questions, and I was wondering where it was going to go, and I had this idea that a lot was going to be answered in future books, but I didn't know until I started reading Dead House Gates. I had no idea that we were going to be going to a whole new continent and have a whole new cast of characters.
Yeah.
And I think my expectations were such that I did expect us to have kind of a clear-cut narrative, like like we're used to seeing in fantasy.
Yeah.
And I think you can see. I know that a lot of people love Dead House Gates because there definitely is, and I would say I think people say this about Gardens of the Moon too. There is kind of like a complete story in each of these books in a way.
Uh-huh.
For whatever reason, though, I did struggle with Dead House Gates. I think part of me got a little attached to Darujistan and
Uh-huh.
to the original, yeah, the Kennebakus, I guess. Is that how you say it? I don't know.
Yes. Yes. That's how I say it. Yep.
Yeah. So going to Seven Cities, I was thrown off a little bit. And then with some of the new characters, it's so strange with Dead House Gates because I found when I was reading it, maybe because I kept on wanting to go back or kept feeling, I did feel like part of me was fighting the narrative a little bit. Like I
Uh-huh.
wasn't conscious. I wasn't conscious of what Erikson was doing.
Right.
He was kind of deconstructing things, and or a normal approach in any case. And so I did struggle when I was reading Dead House Gates. I loved the ending. Don't get me wrong, that ending is incredible.
Oh, yeah.
But after I finished that book, I just wasn't sure. I started to doubt myself. And what was interesting about that was that several months later, I think I was watching Alan of the Library of Alexandria's Dead House Gates video. I had
Okay.
just discovered his channel and was binge watching all his videos at the time. I
I
thought,
could
oh,
see
wow.
that. Yep.
I was excited. I'm like, an older booktuber. I'm gonna watch all their videos. Anyway, so I watched his video on that. I think it was his video that I started reflecting back on that book, and I found myself unable to stop thinking about it.
Huh.
And I realized that that book, the more I reflected on it, the more I loved it. And it was strange for my love of that book to come so late because I can honestly say I don't know that it wasn't falling in love with it while I read it. But
Yeah.
much later, I just couldn't stop thinking about it, the characters and some of the storylines. And I don't know, I just really loved it.
Yeah.
Um, and then what really helped me from there was I found Andy Smith's channel, and and he did this
Great
video
stuff.
on postmodernism and post-structuralism in
That's a
Malazan.
really great video. Yeah, I've talked about it before. It's one of the best videos on the Malazan series out there. Yeah.
It's fantastic. It's
Yeah.
even a fantastic video if you just want to learn about postmodernism and
True.
post-structuralism.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it was once I watched that video and I understood that Erikson was taking a very different narrative approach,
Yeah.
I that helped me tremendously. And understanding that he was not necessarily what Andy called a plot-driven
Uh-huh.
writer, but more
Uh-huh.
of a theme-driven writer,
Mm-hmm.
that helped me tremendously.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Yeah, I mean, these are two good examples of how helpful BookTube can be too. One thing you said that really struck me is how Dead House Gates took time to grow on you. And that is, I think, a sign of a great book. I've had that happen to me with a lot of really great books where I'll read them. And then, by the way, this is not disparaging books that are just like really entertaining and fun. You read them, you put them down, and you don't really think much about them. They have a purpose too. Entertainment is great. So I'm not at all, I hope I don't sound like I'm being snobby about this, but for me, the books that really have affected my life, the ones that have changed me as a person, and fantasy, if so far it's the top two have been Tolkien's Lord of the Rings when I was 12, 13 years old, and Stephen Erikson's The Malazan Book, The Fallen. So, and really the whole Malazan world, including Esselmon's contributions. So these have been life-changing reads for me. And the thing about, when you said about Dead House Gates really resonated with me, because these are books that really stick with you, right? These are books that you will be thinking about not just weeks, but months and years after you've read them. And there's just so much richness and so much depth in there that it leaves you looking at the world a little bit differently, doesn't it? That's my experience anyway. And seeing things just a little bit more clearly, and appreciating things, and feeling that sense of connection that these stories give you to not only the characters in the book, but somehow that seeps out into your life. And
Yes.
it's a beautiful thing. So these are really transformative books. And so I guess that the point maybe is, the more you invest in your reading, the more you're going to get out of it, and with books like this. So yeah, it might not be the easiest thing you've ever read at first, but I've learned to trust Stephen Erikson in that, yeah, okay, maybe I'm not going to immediately get swallowed into this story, but it's going to happen eventually. And I'm going to be thinking about this story for a very long time. So
Yeah, and with some exceptions, I'm sure, I've found that lately, I feel like one of the lessons I'm learning is with really great authors, I have to trust them. That
yeah,
maybe I won't get it or fall in love right away, but sometimes it just comes over with time. And it definitely did. I definitely resonate with what you said about these things staying with you for months. And
yeah,
yeah, absolutely. I feel that way as well. I think, and what's interesting is that because he does introduce such a huge cast of characters, I
yes.
was again, by the way, thrown off when I started Memories of Ice. And then there
Yeah,
was another huge new cast of characters. There are overlapping characters from book to
yeah,
book, but I was, it, it did feel like like you said, in normal fantasy, we're used to following our small cast of characters or our one character, and we don't have that in these books.
right.
However, these characters, they grow on you, and
Yes.
it's so surprising how some of the characters, your attachment to them sneaks up on you. You won't
Oh,
think that you love some characters, and then suddenly their life is threatened or something happens to them and you suddenly care quite a
yeah.
bit.
even characters you thought you didn't like at all, so you find yourself understanding them at the very least. And this is another hallmark of a great book, is the ability for these characters. I mean, I've spent time, crying over the fate of some of these characters, which is astounding. And it just tells you how skilled Erikson is in terms of character development. And he does it without you even noticing, very sneaky. So you get attached to these characters without even realizing it's happening, and that's really quite something.
It's unusual. Like in Midnight Tides, book 5, there were characters that I fell in love with within a few paragraphs.
Sure.
And how did he do that?
Yeah.
I don't know. I didn't even have to spend a long time with them, and I was completely attached to them.
Yep.
So.
And they're brand new characters in that book too. Yeah. So it's amazing. My good buddy AP Canavan, whom I'm sure you know from some of our videos, he's been doing this read along. Talk about really being helped a lot by being part of a community. I've been doing this reread along with him, and he's Stephen Erikson and Ian Esselmont's advanced reader. So, and he's personal friends with them as well. So it's been really, and besides that, AP is just a really brilliant guy and a lot of fun. So I've been doing this reread with him, and we've been doing these collaborative videos, and he has this fantastic analogy with World War II, and explaining how, in World War II, you had these different theaters, and you had the theater in Africa, you had the Asian theater, you had the European theater, and these were all, separate things going on in these separate places with different people, but they were all connected together in this one huge event, this world war. And the Malazan Book, The Fallen, is similar in a way. That's why you have one theater that occurs in book 1, and another theater is introduced in book 2, and then this third theater is introduced in book 5. And they're all part of one big story though, too. And they are definitely connected, and you're halfway through, so you haven't quite seen it yet, but these things they are connected. I won't say too much about that though, so because we're keeping away from the spoilers. But yeah, I mean, convergence is a big thing in this series. So
They are, yeah. And I think what's interesting too, looking from book to book, from book 1 and book 2 and book 3 and book 4 and book 5, is I feel like each book has a very unique approach. Every book, like the structure of each book, I think is different from one another. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely, yeah. Especially we can't get into too much detail, but Midnight Tides felt like a very interesting new kind of structure introduced. That's book 5, which is very different from the previous ones. And they work on different levels. They really do.
Yeah, and without giving anything away, even book 4, we can have a completely different structure because we actually do follow one character.
True. Yes. So yeah, book 4 contains almost well, it wouldn't be a novella for most people. It would be just a novel within a novel, I guess.
Yeah, a little bit too much to be I guess, novella. I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. So very nice. So at any point, did you feel confusion, or because of all the different characters and all the different races and everything else?
And in full transparency, there is still quite a bit about this series I do not grok, that I do not fully grok, but at the same time, I think I have been able to connect to characters, and I have been able to identify themes. And I know that AP has said before in your discussions that this is a series that rewards active reading.
Yes.
So it has taken an investment on my part to take time. Sometimes I do go back and reread passages. I know, for example, when I was reading book 4, House of Chains, which, by the way, I think is my favorite book so far.
Cool.
I loved Midnight Tides. Yeah, I know everybody says memory, and everybody's different. That's important to note. I've talked to people who Dead House Gates is their #1 favorite. Some people, it's Memories of Ice. And for a lot of people, House of Chains was their least favorite. For whatever reason, but I just had a special connection with that book. And it's interesting because there was one particular chapter in that book in the middle that I read, and the first time I read, I just felt like I didn't connect to at all. Like I struggled. There were a whole lot of characters introduced, it would just move from section to section to different point of views.
Yeah.
And I struggled with it. And so I went back and I reread the entire chapter and I loved it. So
That's something. Huh.
it's just kind of funny the way that happens. Sometimes I'll think I'm not really connecting or liking something and I'll reread it and I'll have a totally different experience just rereading a passage of it. So
Yeah.
from that perspective, I could definitely understand how a reread of the series would probably be very impactful for
Yes.
sure.
Oh, it certainly is. I mean, I highly recommend the experience.
Yeah.
I hope you'll have a chance to reread it someday. It's just tremendous how
Yes.
moving this series is, and that it can support. I just talked to Cal, who runs the channel. Uh, let's see, Good and Kind, Really Good and Kind is what it's called. And he's read the Malazan Book of the Fall. He's on his 13th read of the series. And I mean, that's a MalazTuber right there. I mean, he's a well of knowledge about the series and everything. But people can read the series that many times. It supports it, and it's tremendous, you know.
And everybody has their different strength of what they notice or
Yep.
what they tune into.
Yep.
I have a friend on the Discord. He doesn't have a channel, but he is so knowledgeable. I mean, you can
Yes.
ask him any question. He's only
Yep.
read the series once, and he read through the series very quickly.
Huh.
But you could ask him any question. I'm trying to get him to start a channel because I think he would be great. But you can ask him any question on any book and he can spit out the answer right away.
Yeah.
So there are some people like that who are just prodigies when it comes to retaining certain plot information or things like that. So, but then there are some people who tune in more to the emotions, like Counselor of Moonspawn, for example.
Yes.
Her videos are so good about the Malazan community in general is so great on BookTube as far as like giving you different points of reflection and different points of looking and reflecting on certain things, because Erikson, like most great writers, he doesn't tell you how to feel.
That's right.
You're shown things, but you're not necessarily told exactly how to feel about a character or if somebody's good or bad. And sometimes I do think and EP has done this for me too. Some of these people have brought to my attention ways of looking through the lens of certain characters. Well, keep in mind that they're around this person or that person and that this is their situation.
Yeah.
And that's helped me to see, oh, that's why that character made that choice. And it's all there. It's not that Erikson doesn't give it to you, but it does take some active reading or some active part it takes some intention on the part of the reader to see some of these threads.
Yeah. And what you were saying too about the diversity of voices on MalazTube. Ruthin Bad is another great MalazTuber, and he just did a video about his favorite creative MalazTube videos. It's a great video, and he just pointed out like you were saying, the really nice diversity of voices that we have now. And he was counting MalazTube or videos on the Malazan world, or on I think it maybe even just the Malazan Book of the Fallen. But anyway, he got to 200 and he stopped counting, and he said there's just hundreds of videos now. And this wasn't the case, as you said earlier. This wasn't the case a few years ago. So good times for Malazan fans on BookTube for sure. So yeah. So another thing we should talk about, I think, a bit, and is the tone and the prose, because Erikson has such range, and this is a good thing. This is a very good thing to have as a writer, because he's able to capture all of life in these books. There's comedy, and of course there's plenty of tragedy, and there's sorrow, but there's also humor, and there's triumph, and there's joy, and there's people who fail to understand one another's failure, but then there are moments of these just beautiful connection that happens between characters as well. So it's just the whole gamut of life in here, and it's amazing to see this just sort of spread out in these books before your eyes. But it's got everything. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. Yes. These books, they have some of the most, I know I know there's a lot of discussion about, you've addressed this discussion quite a bit
Yeah.
about whether these books are grimdark, because
Yeah.
there are some brutal moments. There are
Oh, yeah.
many trigger warnings for the series. There is violence,
Graphic
to
content.
yes,
Yep.
there is
Yep.
sexual abuse, there
Yep.
everything you can think of. But at the same time, there is humor, and it's an interesting kind of humor too, right? I mean, you see the gallows humor, which you mentioned before, but you
Yes.
also
Yeah.
see kind of just some absurdist humor too, kind of along the lines, I think, of like Terry Pratchett kind of humor.
Yep.
Um,
There's
and
wordplay. Yeah. I mean,
yes,
yeah, it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's just everything you can imagine, and each book brings a little bit of a different spin there, and introduces new themes as well. I loved your video on uh, let's see, when you brought up brotherhood in Midnight Tides. I thought that was really nice, and reciprocity as well. As there's the uber theme of, you know, empathy and compassion, but there are all these other wonderful themes that are brought into the individual books that come to prominence. So I was talking to AP recently about how, you know, in let's see, Deadhouse Gates, or no, I'm sorry, in Memories of Ice, in the third book, you get motherhood as a prominent theme. And then you have sisters in the fourth book, in a sense. And then in the fifth book, you have the brothers, and it just, again, all these themes are just so fantastic, and really keep you pondering. So it's one of the
yes,
great aspects of this series. But yeah, as you said, there are things that you should be prepared for, and I guess it's good to warn people that there are moments of, I mean, I guess I mean, there's lots of violence. Of course, this is fantasy. It would be unusual to have a fantasy without any violence, but and there are moments where characters are there's rape, and then that sort of thing does happen in the course of the series. I would say that Erikson does a really good job of not just having a terrible thing like that happen and then leaving it. What he does is, what I think he's more interested in what happens to people afterwards. In other words, he follows up on it, and he's more interested, even in case of violence and battles and stuff. I find that he's more interested in what happens to people before and after, rather than during. Although he's incredibly good at writing battle scenes, and you know, these are very entertaining as well. These books are very entertaining, so it's got everything really. So
yeah, it's great for a military fantasy perspective, from a
yeah,
military fantasy perspective. But again, like you said, there are uh, dynamics such as motherhood and brotherhood and
yeah,
sisterhood. So you don't have to be a battle lover, because I know I have a lot of fantasy lover friends who aren't crazy about battle scenes,
yeah,
but that's
yeah,
not exactly why they read fantasy. But if
right.
you love those kinds of things, it's great for that too. Um, yeah, I think that's definitely, I agree with that. Trying to think if there was some other point I was going to say about that. Yes,
About the
oh
theme.
yes. I think the word that comes to mind, are you familiar with the word chiaroscuro?
Oh yes, yes. In art, you know, so dark and light, and in contrast to one another. Is that what you mean? Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's what I think of a lot. I don't know, that word comes to my mind a lot when I'm reading Malazan, because it's the
Neat.
dark makes the light lighter in a way, and so they kind of complement each other in a way. There is definitely a theme of balance too that comes up, balance and chaos, and there are so many different sub themes. Like you said, I think that was also a major selling point for me, by the way, was when I heard that this series is about compassion and empathy, and
Yeah.
you definitely see how those two themes play out, but you also see all these other sub themes, and
Yeah.
you see the world. It's an interesting, complex world, but you see it through each character's perspective, like so many different character perspectives.
Yeah. That's so
And
true.
one thing I love about the characters, and bringing it back to characters, I know, but one
It's
thing I
great.
love about the characters in this series is how Erikson, each character is unique and distinct from one another,
Hmm.
but they
Hmm.
are also clearly a product of their society and
Yes.
their upbringing, their family. There are all these different factors that make it really clear why they are the way that they are.
Yeah.
It's just an incredible complex construction of each individual identity.
Yeah.
And many of them, and at the same time, I don't think I've ever read a series in which the characters were so self-aware. So
Uh-huh.
many of the characters are in this series.
Some of them are, they really are. And there's a lot of reflection in these books. There's a lot of reflection and philosophy, which really resonates with me. One of the reasons I love it. But yeah, you're right about the cultures too. They're just so rich in there. They're so rich. There's lots of different cultures and races in here with hundreds of thousands of years of history behind them. So, I mean, Erikson is an archaeologist, and that really shows at times in these books. It's really amazing how he and Esselmont built these cultures over the course of years while gaming, and being able to present them in these books is just fantastic. And the characters who come from these cultures, who encounter one another, and sometimes there's conflict and violence, and sometimes there are moments of incredible pathos and beauty. It's just it's indescribable, really. You have to
That's one of my
experience.
favorite things about this series. Especially, I know that I think one of the terms that's used a lot in Malazan are the dynamic duos. You
Yes,
often have
yes,
characters like these pairs of characters, and often these pairs of characters, they're not from the same society or race even.
right.
There are just some beautiful, beautiful character dynamics that
Yeah.
I've cried over many of them. They're just so beautiful.
Same here. Yeah, the duos in the Malazan world, people will talk about them a lot, and we won't name specific ones because we're not doing spoilers, but they are wonderful. And AP has mentioned how this is sort of a result of Esselmont and Erikson gaming this together as a pair of friends. And so one would play the other, one character, and one would play the other. And so these relationships feel so real, perhaps because of that dynamic that they established with each other. So it's so cool. It really
That
is.
is interesting. So I wonder if in constructing that, maybe they didn't have like an endpoint in mind necessarily, but and maybe that's what makes the dynamic feel so alive. At least
Yeah.
that's because it does. It feels like the relationship dynamics, they feel very alive and very, I don't know, there's just something really special
Yeah.
about them.
Oh, that's really beautifully put. And I think it's so true. And if there's no end game in mind, that's great for us fans, right?
Yes. Yes.
So yeah, no, I think that is part of what makes it feel real. We talk about it's fantasy, but at the same time, there's so much that feels so real to this. And it speaks so much to our human experiences, really. So just a wonderful thing. I've heard so many people talk about how this series has helped them in their lives and to get through their lives, to get through hard times, to understand themselves. So it's just obviously there's something there, right?
Yeah,
So,
I can honestly say that's been the case for me too. And
yeah,
actually, some of the themes and some of the questions that are raised in the series, to be honest, have not been easy for me to look at either. I
uh,
feel
yep,
I feel
yep,
like some of them have been a bit challenging to look at, and because there's just an honest examination of some of our less desirable human qualities too.
yeah, yeah. That's so true. Yeah. I mean, for example, our tendency to, and this is related to what we've done to the environment, and you see environmental themes in Erikson's books a lot, but our tendency to think of ourselves as the center of the universe, to think of ourselves as we're, wherever consciousness resides, whatever it is, and nobody's actually figured this out. But part of growing up to me is figuring out that you're not the center of everything. And in fact, that you are connected with not just the people around you, but with the life that is all around you. And that is something I take from this series as well. And it is just it's so beautifully presented. I feel that this sense that I'm not here on my own. I am actually connected to the people that I come in contact with. And in some sense, I am that other person, and that other person is me. And I think that's a
Yeah.
really important insight that is essential, I think maybe, and correct me if you think I'm wrong, but I think it's essential to becoming a fulfilled person. So.
Oh, yes, I 100% agree. Yeah, I hope you don't mind me mentioning, but I really loved how when you spoke to Erikson, you brought up the wave analogy.
Oh, from Thich Nhat Hanh's book, The Heart of the
Yes.
Buddhist Teaching. Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
So the idea behind that is that in Buddhist philosophy, or in Thich Nhat Hanh's book, he speaks about how a lot of times we go through life feeling like we're this individual wave, that we're just separate from everything around us.
Yeah.
And the Buddhist perspective is to open us up to realize that we're not the wave, we are the ocean. Did I
Yeah.
say that accurately?
Beautifully, beautiful. Actually, better than I did.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
But I loved
Beautiful.
how you connected that to Malazan.
Yeah, that's been the experience for me. And so, and that's something you see a lot in this series, is that a character, and this is not a spoiler, really. I'm not talking about specifics here, but you'll find that one body can house more than one soul, if you will.
Oh,
So,
yes, that's really
yeah,
good. Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
that's
This
a
is
really
something
good
that
way to put it.
happens a few times, importantly, in the series. So,
I
um,
love that. Yes, that's perfect.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, we're
Yeah,
not
that's
as isolated as we sometimes pretend to be. We're not as individualistic or segmented as we sometimes. Our perception is that, here I am inside this, body, and I am me, and that's such a limited, such an ephemeral perspective, isn't it? And what Erikson gives us, with the vastness of the scope and the time and the space of this world, is this sense that I'm not alone here. I've compared it to going to the American Museum of Natural History in New York City, and going to their IMAX theater and watching this movie about the history of the universe. And it starts on Earth, and you think, okay, Earth is nice, and then here's the Earth in comparison to the rest of the solar system, and we're tiny, we're this little grain of dust. And then, oh, by the way, this solar system's part of this galaxy. And then you pan out further, and this galaxy is part of this universe. And when you get to the end of it, you're just completely, your jaw's on the floor, just to think of. I mean, you can't really wrap your mind around it, the scale of it all, because we're just, here, this little speck of dust. But I find it so beautiful at the same time, and somehow this series makes me feel that way, like
yeah.
I'm gazing up at the stars. So
And yeah, I love that. And I think even from sort of another way of looking at it too, what a beautiful speck of dust. Because
yes,
because
yes,
yeah, because I think that one of the things that I'm learning from this series, or that I'm taking away from it, is just the way we as humans, I mean, just like when we read fantasy, like I said before, we want to attach to our one main protagonist, or maybe our five
yeah,
main protagonists, and
yeah,
we want to follow this certain group of characters in this world. Whereas Malazan Book of the Fallen, you're following so many different perspectives from different races, even, and different societies,
right,
different philosophies, and each one is so valuable. Even the perspectives, even if we're not, it's in third person, we're not looking in first person,
right,
but even among the characters that we're following, there are still so many side characters that are
yes,
so brilliantly written. I've found myself completely loving some of the side characters that
yeah.
you only see very, very briefly in a few exchanges.
But they're so vivid.
They are so vivid, and they sneak up on, some of them sneak up on you too. You don't think this is going to be an important character, and they later turn out to be very important in
Yeah.
some.
Yeah, you reminded me of the poem by Blake, "To see the world in a grain of sand." The idea that you could find heaven in a single flower, that sort of thing. So
Oh, I love that.
yeah,
Oh, that's beautiful. I'll have
yeah,
to look that up. Who is that? That's by Blake?
Blake. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I'll
The
have to look
the
that up.
early romantic poet. Yeah.
Is it William Blake or?
Yes. Yeah. 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 Yep. To see the world in a grain of sand. I can't recite it. I'm sorry, but that's the opening line.
Oh,
You would find it that way. But
well, I love romantic poetry, so I'll have to look that up.
I do too. Yeah, yeah. And Erikson has some nice poetry in there as well.
Oh, he does. Yes.
Yeah, little epigrams and
Even
yeah.
even just the epigraphs in
Yep.
this chapter that begin the chapters, some of them are just amazing. They're fantastic.
Yeah, yeah. And they are also, don't feel like when on your first read, you need to totally get all of the epigraphs and
Oh, good, because I don't.
because you don't, and that's okay. But often he is hinting at something thematically or even sometimes plot-wise. There's usually some relationship between that epigraph and the chapter to follow. He's kind of giving a little wink there, I think, sometimes. So, but I mean, don't feel like you have to get it the first time. I often think that it might even be better to go back to the epigraph after you've read the chapter and try to make sense of it that way, maybe. Yeah.
I might do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
But
yeah.
speaking of reflective passages, though, there are
Yeah.
some of the most beautiful reflections.
Yep.
Just gorgeous.
Yep.
They're so beautiful. And sometimes those reflective passages that are sometimes from, and I feel like sometimes the reflective passages that I'm thinking of, sometimes they happen when a character is just by themselves, or you're just hearing their thoughts.
Yeah.
But sometimes to me, they can be a hint at certain themes.
Oh, yes.
That I pick up on in the series. Yeah.
Yeah, what a rich experience. So it sounds like you're enjoying it so far.
Yes, I really, really am. I am loving this series so far. At what point did you realize it was going to be a favorite for you?
So I think the first time, and I'm stretching back with my memory here. Talk about ephemeral. I'm stretching back my memory, and I'm thinking in at least the narrative that I'm telling myself these days is that I loved Gardens of the Moon. Obviously, I loved it enough to keep going, but it was Dead House Gates that sort of just kind of hit me in the gut, and I realized, oh, this is something I've never seen anything like this before. The first time I read it, this was my experience. And so Dead House Gates on, I was like hooked. The second time, I think every book has just hit me so much harder even than the first time. And so I think I went from this is an amazing series that people should read to, on my second read, this is my favorite fantasy series, just my favorite literary experience all time of my whole life. So that I went from really amazing, awesome, you should read this, to this is the best thing I've ever read. So
wow.
Yeah.
Yes, it's interesting reading through the series. For the first time, I'm noticing so much how connected certain connections between the books. Like when I read Memories of Ice, I immediately wanted to reread Gardens of the Moon. When I read House of Chains, I immediately wanted to reread Dead House Gates. There are certain connections that you see in all the books, actually.
Yeah.
But yes, I can't wait to reread this series someday.
Yeah.
I'm curious about the later 5 books, though, too. So, do you have any insights about that you can tell me, spoiler free? Because I've heard various things. I've heard that some of the later books, like Toll the Hounds, for example, I think, and Dust of Dreams, get very, very heavy into philosophy. Is that correct?
I think if you were maybe, I don't want to discount people. I know Alan, for example, would definitely agree with that. But for me, I feel like he really brought this. I mean, my favorite book in the series probably is the last one, although it depends on the day when you ask me. But if I'm remembering it all correctly, I loved how he brought it to a close. It was incredible, just incredible. That was my experience. It was just, and I like themes in my books, so I maybe that's part of it. It's just that it resonated with me because that's kind of the sort of thing I love when I'm reading. But it still has all the other stuff too. There's major, battles and crises and stuff going on as well. So there's plenty of that. But they do get longer. The books do get longer, starting with the Bone Hunters, the 6th book. And
I'm actually currently reading the Bone Hunters.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
pretty, it is pretty long.
It's longer. Yeah. If you look up the word count, don't go by the page numbers or even how fat the book is. Just look up the word count, and that really tells you how long it is. And the last 5 books are longer. They're big books.
Right, because I have the trade paperback. Actually, I have my copy right here.
Oh, cool.
I have my trade paperback,
Oh,
and
nice. Yeah.
this one is, I bought this used library copy.
Uh-huh.
This one ends at page 884, but I know in mass market paperback size, that's what, 1,200 pages or something like that.
Yes. Yes. I see you have a few tabs in there as
I
well.
do, yes. I'm the worst about tabbing up my books like crazy. I actually have like a whole system for that too. It's kind of interesting.
Well, you're very organized. That's good. Yeah. Nothing wrong
Yeah.
with that.
Yeah. I know a lot of people do recommend, and I would agree with this, to not to rush the experience of reading the books.
Yeah. Yeah, go at a pace that feels right to you. And again, I think it's good to emphasize this is a long-term experience, these books. I mean, if you enjoy them, these are books that you will want to, I think, read again and again, but there's no hurry. And one mistake I made on my first read was I was in a hurry to sort of master everything. And I get the geography and I get all the characters and this is where this one's from. And I spent too much energy and time trying to figure that out rather than being in the moment of the story. So that was one thing I did. That if I could go back in time and sort of tell myself, you should relax a little bit and enjoy the read instead of trying to, master it all. I think it's just a much more enjoyable experience that way, and it will allow you to connect emotionally more easily. And you're not. I was ripping myself out of the story all the time, trying to figure out who's who and what's what. And I look at maps a lot. That's the kind of person I am. But
It's hard not to do that, though.
Yeah.
It's very, very, I still do that to an extent.
Yeah.
I haven't totally let go. The moments have been able, though, to just relax into the experience. Yeah, definitely much more enjoyable experience for sure.
Yeah. And so on the second read, I haven't had to do that really. Because I got it all the first time around, and now I'm just immersed in the story, totally immersed.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a challenge. I think it's a little bit of a balance, because I think you do. I feel like I want to owe the book a certain amount of respect by making sure I am paying attention and what's happening. And at the same time, yeah, you can't catch everything. I think it was encouraging to watch Erikson over on Brittany from Books with Brittany.
Oh, that was a great interview.
Oh,
Yeah.
I loved that interview. I loved that interview. But he did say that you're not expected to get everything the first time reading through the series.
Yeah.
And I know that was very encouraging for me to hear.
Yeah. And at the same time, as you've shown us today, there's just so much to get out of it on your first read.
That's true. Yeah. Yeah. So, you have to kind of give yourself credit for what you do get out of it the first time. And
yeah. It's a really rewarding experience.
Yeah.
So, well, anything else that you want to talk about? I think we did pretty well here.
I think we did pretty well too. I guess all I could say is I'm greatly enjoying this series, and I'm also at an advantage, like you said, because there is so much wonderful Malazan content, including the content you're bringing out on your channel. So it's really great to be in the same point as you, Philip, because I can follow along on your videos, at least for now. I'm hoping.
I'm actually really happy that you're at this. You're a little ahead of me, actually. I haven't even started the Bone Hunters yet, so you're a little ahead of me. I'm so happy that we're reading this kind of simultaneously. So that's fun.
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun to continue to follow along. I'm so grateful for the Malazan content that's out there, though, because these books, they do reward reflection. And I think, as we've mentioned before, there are so many different voices in the community that highlight different parts of the story or different aspects to attend to.
It's an exciting time. And Mike over at Mike's Book Reviews is doing this wonderful read along of the series. And I think he's bringing a lot of new readers into it. And there's a whole support system inside his Discord, just like there is in Iskar Jarek's Discord, and Andy Smith has a nice Discord, and so
There are
there's
so many good Discords, and that can be so much fun, by the way, for first-time readers. I know for me, I'm very active over in Allen at the Library of Alexandria. He has a Discord, and he has a Malazan section in his Discord. It was so funny. In book 5, there was a certain character. I promise this will be spoiler-free, but there was a certain character. And at one point I wrote something like, oh, I think there's a little something more to this character. And suddenly Andy Smith and a whole bunch of other people dropped that emoji with the big eyes looking sideways to kind of hint at, watch out.
Yeah, that's
You touched
great.
on something. And so it's just so funny because they're so good about keeping it spoiler free, but also people love seeing in the Discord. The unique feature is that you can hide spoilers, but at the same time, people who've read ahead of you can get excited for you and what you're experiencing or what you're about to experience, and you kind of have a team cheering you on in a way.
Yeah, I'm terrible at Discord.
I've become terrible about it honestly lately, but yeah.
but I really love how respectful the fans are, and it just tells you. I think it tells you something about this series too, that the fans are just so nice, and the fact that they want you to enjoy this experience and they want to go out of their way not to spoil it for you, but at the same time encourage you. That's a sign of some, I like that. I like that, to see that in people. And I think that this is a series that encourages you to reflect and be an empathetic person. And I think that's just what literature should do. It's about life too. So it's a beautiful thing. Well, thank you so much, Johanna, for being here. And everybody, if you don't know about her channel, I'm going to put a link in it in the description, a link to it in the description below, and check out her videos, not just her Malazan content, but you've done a lot. What, First Law, and you've got some Tolkien stuff going on there, and you've got lots of great stuff going on your channel. So everybody check out Johanna's channel. It is a wonderful place. And as you've already seen, she is a wonderful person. So thank you so much, Johanna, for being a guest here. It's always a pleasure to interact with you.
Oh, thank you so much, Philip. Likewise.
Okay, bye-bye.